We are briefly in Matt and Julian Oscillation Phase 7. During the summer, Phase 7 brings us a tendency towards unusual heat in the southwest deserts, wet weather in the lower Mississippi River Basin, and a cool pattern in the Midwest. Not surprisingly, that's what we're seeing today. The official start of summer, Friday, June 20th at 9:42 p.m. Central, just 9 days away. Then we'll be rolling up our sleeves and getting ready for hurricane season, and it could be a busy one. And look out there in the Pacific, just vast amounts of stratus for thousands of miles. The marine layer stratus especially powerful this time of year and invades Southern California as we get that increase in heating. And that's referred to as the June gloom. And just to show you, this is yesterday afternoon. If we roll this into the evening, you're going to see that stratus move inland right there. At dawn, the visible imagery kicks back in, and that stratus and fog has moved quite a ways inland, all the way to Riverside. All this area right here, that is covered by stratus. And as we get the heating, that gradually erodes it and pushes it back to the coast, and that's about where we're at right now. Some very interesting patterns offshore there. Little microscale circulations, probably interactions with the cold currents offshore. As far as tropical cyclone activity, nothing spinning up in the Atlantic right now, but in the East Pacific, the remains of Hurricane Barbara right there, and further south, this is the remains of former Tropical Storm Cosme, 500 miles southwest of the tip of Baja California, winds 35 miles an hour, drifting slowly north, and it's expected to dissipate completely. Additional tropical cyclone development possible off the coast of southwestern Mexico over the next week. Let's take a look at the surface map for this afternoon. It is gradually starting to look like summer. We're getting that drying out there in the deserts, temperatures well up into the 100s from Phoenix to Blythe and Barstow. Up north, some cold air coming out of Canada, dropping the temperatures into the 70s, and we've got that front extending from the Great Lakes out towards Nebraska into Wyoming. Kind of a intermediate air mass in between across the Midwest, Missouri, Oklahoma, and we pick up the actual tropical air down to the south on the Gulf Coast and into the Big Bend area of Texas. And I think we are picking up a dry line right there. The dew point's quite a bit lower, and I think this is probably bad data right there. And they drop off significantly into Tucson, Nogales, and Safford. Across the northeastern U.S., temperatures about what you would expect this time of year. Upper 70s across New England and New York to upper 80s in Virginia. In the Great Lakes, we saw 80s across Indiana, Ohio, and lower Michigan, with 90s in northern Illinois. The eastern Lake Michigan coast from South Haven to Mason County under a beach hazard statement for high wave action and dangerous swimming conditions. Across the southeastern region, warm conditions. Highs were in the 80s up to the mid-90s. The warmest temperatures were across northeastern Florida and southern Georgia. Yesterday, daily records for morning lows were tied at Miami and Fort Lauderdale. The morning low yesterday, only 80 at Miami and 81 at Fort Lauderdale. Let's take a look at the SPC risk areas. And it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but this marginal risk pops up right here in coastal North Carolina into southeastern Virginia. That's going to be for isolated occurrences of large hail and high winds. Other storms further down the coast along the various sea breezes and into the Gulf Coast area as far west as Pensacola and Mobile. Additional storms further out into Louisiana. And here we get into some more organized activity. Let's move out there for a closer look. So let's take a look at 36 hours of activity. We go back to yesterday morning. This MCS across the central part of Texas into the Edwards Plateau. And that moves to the east across East Texas, another round of storms, especially out there in West Texas, some very strong activity. I think I did see one tornado warning yesterday that propagated overnight into the San Antonio, Austin area, all the way down to Laredo, and then swung up into East Texas. And as we get towards the end, this is about where we're at right now. A MCS moving into Louisiana. There it is right there. All the way down to Beaumont, up to maybe just west of Monroe, Arkadelphia, and up towards Fort Smith. We are expecting additional rounds overnight tonight, starting in that usual area, Central Texas, Southwest Texas. That'll move in the very same pattern tomorrow, and then we should see things start to improve. For today, however, a slight risk from Houston to San Antonio. An outside chance of an isolated tornado, but the main risk is going to be gusty downburst winds. This is the excessive rainfall outlook through 6 a.m. tomorrow. A moderate risk of excessive rainfall across much of central Texas. This will include whatever forms later tonight. The hazards continue through tomorrow, a large slight risk. A flood watch is in effect for much of northeast Texas, including the DFW area, Waco, Tyler, Longview, Texarkana, into the Arklatex, including Shreveport, and parts of southwestern Arkansas. Multiple rounds of heavy rain extending through tomorrow, especially in this area for tomorrow into Friday. And there is the potential for up to 5 inches of additional rain through Friday. Much of this activity has resulted due to this upper-level low coming out of West Texas into the Red River region. This is where we're at for 7 p.m. Looks like the center of it, just north of Abilene, and then into tonight. It moves off into Oklahoma and gradually into the Ozarks by Friday. So as this area of higher geopotential height moves into Texas and Oklahoma, we should see things start to improve. The big factor in all this is the high precipitable water values, 1.5 to 2 inches, and in some areas over 2 inches. As we go into tonight and into tomorrow, the axis of that is pretty much over the Arklatex area and the lower Mississippi River Valley. It does kind of build back into Texas on Friday, but we will come increasingly under the influence of upper ridging, which means fewer opportunities to generate convective rainfall. But into the weekend, that's not the case in the southeastern U.S., abundant precip throughout that entire area into early next week. In the central plains, especially in Nebraska, some very hot conditions. We've got mid-90s from Norfolk to Omaha, and some additional hot weather all the way to Waterloo, Iowa. Thunderstorms developing along this front located right there, and we've had severe thunderstorm warnings across part of Iowa this afternoon. The Storm Prediction Center has a slight risk across northern Iowa and adjoining border areas of Minnesota due to the potential for scattered gusty downburst winds and hail. A severe thunderstorm watch is in effect for this area until 10 p.m. And a marginal risk for severe extends all the way from northeastern Nebraska, southeastern South Dakota into northern Iowa, and southern Wisconsin as far as Madison and Milwaukee. This afternoon, we have warm conditions across the Rockies, 88 at Denver, with 70s and 80s for the mountain valleys. The Four Corners, we're seeing low to mid-90s, as warm as 96 at Tuba City, Arizona, 99 at Page on the Utah border, also lower 90s in Albuquerque, and mid-90s at El Paso. And since we're getting into mid-June, this is about when we're starting to look for that monsoon onset in New Mexico as the dry line in Texas breaks down and allows that moisture to flow further to the northwest. And to track that moisture, we're going to start looking at this monsoon chart. This shows the dew points and the precipitation field. And as we go forward, it is rather dry across the southwestern region, mostly 20s and 30s dew points. Some moisture out there in eastern New Mexico, but we're not seeing those high values around Albuquerque, Gallup, and Tucson. As we go into the weekend, very dry. It's going to be a hot, dry weekend, and then looks like a little influx of moisture early next week, right around here. Maybe some 30s and 40s flowing north through Arizona. Maybe some activity popping up on the Mogollon Rim for midweek and in the Four Corners area as well. It becomes dry again, but looks like some of that moisture kind of nipping at our heels in New Mexico. And yeah, that's going to be the last frame right there. So this is what we're looking at more for mid-June. That's very typical. And we're going to see that moisture probably building further into New Mexico for later in the month. For today, however, very hot temperatures, 106 right now at Phoenix, 108 at Blythe, and 107 at Barstow Daggett. And on the coast, that marine influence we talked about, upper 60s, very cool weather. And I remember many summers ago getting off the plane, coming back from the Philippines. I was an Air Force dependent at the time. Stepped off the plane on July 6th, and it was cold. We needed a jacket. They unloaded us on the tarmac, and we were freezing. And that's after 3 years of living in the Philippines. You can imagine how that felt with that cold Pacific flow coming across just like that. The San Joaquin Valley, hot with 90s across that area. We have an extreme heat watch this weekend across parts of the Grand Canyon area. Below 4,000 feet, temperatures could be above 100 degrees. And a large extreme heat watch covering the lower southwest deserts. We're talking about Tucson, Phoenix, Safford, Gila Bend, Yuma, Blythe, Imperial. They could all be in the 105 to 115 range. In the northwestern U.S., a mix of temperatures. Pleasant from Portland to Seattle, mid to upper 70s, but in the interior, very hot, mid-90s at Yakima, Pasco, and Moses Lake. A little bit hotter in the Salt Lake City area, 97 there. Yesterday, Spokane reached 92, Ellensburg 97. Those set new daily records. Yakima reached 98, Klamath Falls 95, Medford 99, all of those tying daily records. For today, we have a large marginal risk for severe thunderstorms covering all of Wyoming, southern and central Idaho, and much of southern and central Montana. You can see that little upper vortex right there. So certainly some interaction with upper level conditions, strong flow helping to organize those storms. We're looking for isolated gusty downburst winds, isolated hail occurrences, not really any tornado risk or anything like that. A flood watch posted for the northwest Bitterroots, right in that area due to that complex going right over the mountains, excessive runoff causing problems there, and a red flag warning for this afternoon, possibility of lightning strike-induced wildfires, including Ontario and parts of the US 95 corridor. Then we take a trip out west into the Pacific. Widespread cold advection. That's that strong northwesterly flow pushing those lower thickness values to the southeast. Little upper-level vortex in the Gulf of Alaska, but as far as Alaska itself, summer has arrived. Temperatures in the interior rising to the 70s today, and we could see 80s this weekend. But spring solidly locked in place on the western coasts. Already we're seeing 68 at Fort Yukon, and in Fairbanks we're looking for 70 for the first time this season. That's going to be the latest occurrence of 70 degrees at Fairbanks on record. The record so far was June 7th in 1955. And of course, it's already June 11th. They're expecting 80 degrees on Saturday, however. In Canada, a big change in the wildfires. Cool conditions across that area, I would guess probably starting to shut down that activity. The lighter winds also helping. But smoke has been pushed to the southwest, right in this area right there. You can see the restricted visibilities around Regina up into the, I think that's going to be the Moose Jaw area. We have air quality warnings for wildfire smoke across lower Alberta and Saskatchewan, including the big cities, Regina, Saskatoon, Calgary, and Edmonton. In southern British Columbia, we have advisories for heat over the next couple of days. Temperatures may reach 95 degrees or 35 Celsius. cooler temperatures expected towards the weekend. No problems at all in eastern Canada. Cool northwesterly flow, lots of rain, and just kind of a gentle rain. The warm sector well to the south, that's where we look for severe weather possibilities. Areas further north under this occlusion and cold polar air. Okay, good time to look at the forecast. Let's go into tonight. It is going to be wet across central Texas, especially with that frontal boundary down to the south. And of course, the pocket of mid-level cooler temperatures and instability gradually moving to the east. For tomorrow, the Storm Prediction Center has a broad marginal risk covering much of south central and east Texas into Arkansas, northwest Louisiana, and the Memphis area. Isolated hail and high winds are expected there. Also a marginal risk of severe thunderstorms from eastern Colorado, northwest Kansas across Nebraska into all of the Sioux Falls area, Minneapolis, and back towards the Nebraska Panhandle. And it really does look like we're shifting into a typical June pattern for severe weather as it gradually winds down and shifts to the north. For Friday, frontal boundary across the Great Lakes into the northern plains, continued rainy with air mass type thunderstorms across the southeastern U.S. For Texas, a warm-up beginning as we see a decline in thunderstorm activity and the ridging building in. A large slight risk for severe thunderstorms across all of the high plains, focusing on the panhandles, western Oklahoma, northeast Colorado, the Nebraska Panhandle, northeastern Wyoming, and possibly all the way up towards Billings. That's due to the strong west-northwest flow with backed surface winds. Precipitable water will be in the upper 90th percentile, so we'll probably see heavy rains and scattered occurrences of large hail and damaging winds, and maybe some isolated tornado potential where we have winds strongly backed. And I would be thinking maybe along that frontal boundary there in Nebraska. For Saturday, a wet pattern for just about everywhere in the eastern U.S., east of Missouri and Illinois. So basically that area right there, all the way down into Florida. Much colder in New England and the upper northeast region as a cold air mass surges south that will suppress the highs into the 60s from Maine to Boston and Providence, 70s from New York City to Albany and Pittsburgh. The heat really cranks up this weekend in the southwest deserts, up to 110 at Phoenix, 106 for Tucson, and 106 for Las Vegas. And it gets even worse for Sunday. 113 for Phoenix on Sunday, 109 at Tucson, 108 at Las Vegas, and Palm Springs up to 111. Then for Monday, a rainy pattern across the Appalachians into the deep south. We see some of that ridging building into Texas, some of the desert heat starting to move into Lubbock and Midland. They could approach 100 degrees. Rain chances increasing along this front there in South Dakota, Minnesota, and Iowa. So some of those summertime MCSs starting to get set up. And as we go into Tuesday, rain chances in Nebraska, Kansas along that boundary which has pushed to the south. We could see 100s across Texas. If you look at that thickness field, it does form kind of a ridge right there. That's indicating very hot temperatures into Amarillo, Clovis, Lubbock, and Carlsbad. The Weather Service forecast grids do back off on the heat for Tuesday in the deserts, mid to upper 100s. And then just looking at the rest of the pattern, typical June weather, most of it concentrated on the Dakotas, Nebraska, Minnesota, Iowa, and so forth. And yeah, since this popped up for our Canadian viewers, I'll just give you a look at that right there. Looks like plenty of cold air in the Hudson Bay region, some of it shifting down into the southern Canadian provinces. The Gulf of Alaska, stormy. So clouds and rain in southeastern Alaska and the British Columbia coast. And this looks like a pretty strong front right there into Ontario and Quebec. The 540 line coming all the way down into the Moosonee, York Factory area, and maybe all the way down towards not quite to Quebec City, but almost there. So this portends of some very cold weather in Maine and New England for June 19th and 20th. And that's all for this Wednesday edition of Forecast Lab. Hope you enjoyed it. Thanks to our newest Patreon supporters, Mel 24/7, Cyrus Rushdie, Max D, and Ed Davies. Thank you very much for the support, which helps keep this program going. All right, we'll see everybody back here on Friday for another episode. Take care and have a great Wednesday night. Bye-bye.